What if the greatest philosophers, warriors, and poets of ancient Greece had love stories they never taught you in school? This isn't the Greece from glossy textbooks or marble statues. This is the Greece whispered about in shadows where gods pursued boys. Soldiers shared more than battlefields, and love between men was not taboo, but sometimes sacred, sometimes political, and always complex. You're about to step into gymnasiums where attraction was hidden in plain sight, banquets where wine loosened more than tongues, and myths that masked desire in divine metaphors.
Not yet.
Before we dive into the real stories, comment below what time you're watching this from. It's always fascinating to see where in the world history is being uncovered. And hey, if you're into honest, raw, and untamed history, feel free to subscribe. We don't sugarcoat the past here. Ready to see what really happened? Let's begin. You step quietly into a world where education, mentorship, and desire are braided together so tightly, it's hard to tell where one ends and another begins. The word pederasty might sound clinical now, but in ancient Greece, especially Athens, it shaped how young boys came of age. You're not handed a pamphlet or a warning. Instead, you're handed over to a mentor. An older man, established, powerful, and yes, often interested in more than just teaching you about Homer and hoplite warfare. He's called an Erastes, a lover, a guide. You're the Eromenos, the beloved, the learner. And whether you like it or not, you're now the younger half of a pair that everyone seems to accept as part of your social growth. You're probably asking, was this normal? It depends on what normal means in a world where public nudity was standard gym protocol and where grown men wrote odes to the curve of a boy's neck. You don't get a locker, but you do get a sponsor. Someone who buys your armor, teaches you poetry, and maybe carves your name into a cup while sighing wistfully. This isn't just about lust. It's about lineage legacy and a rather tangled form of love. One that the city-state doesn't exactly condemn, but doesn't spell out either. You might imagine this like a mentorship program with, let's say, benefits. Except there's no HR department in the Agora. What makes this more complex is the layer of unspoken rules. Rules that whisper, this is fine, as long as you don't get too clingy or grow a beard. Because once the boy becomes a man, the script flips. He's expected to graduate socially, emotionally, sexually. Hanging on to your old Erastes too long, that's frowned upon. It's like staying at your internship well into your 30s. Awkward at best, humiliating at worst. So there you are, sitting cross-legged on the floor, trying to focus on Aristotle, while your mentor gazes at you like you're both a student and a statue. How does that sit with you? Are you flattered, confused, uncomfortable, or maybe just numb to the whole performance? Ancient Greek boys likely felt all of the above. And there's no diary entry to confirm it. Most of what survives is written by the men, the Aristi, who could afford to philosophize, compose and mythologize their experiences into something noble. And noble it was considered. You weren't some casual fling. You were a vessel for excellence, molded by love and intellect. Philosophers like Xenophon described ideal relationships between an older and younger man as spiritual training, shaping a soul through affection. You wonder if that's just a fancy way of dressing up a power imbalance. And yes, you're not wrong. The entire system is built on inequality disguised as mentorship, which doesn't sound all that foreign, does it? Imagine being a teenager today, and your school guidance counselor says, "Great news, you've been paired with a wealthy businessman who'll mentor you. Also, he might write poetry about your calves." It's hard not to raise your eyebrows. And yet in ancient Athens, this was how elites built trust and influence. It was also how many young men earned protection, career advancement, and a leg up in the courtroom, sometimes quite literally. You'd expect this kind of arrangement to be hidden, but no. It's in vase paintings, plays, even graffiti. You could find a shard of pottery with a name, and the phrase, "Kalos Beautiful," scribbled beside it, like a public crush announcement, carved into the ruins. These weren't subtle declarations. They were social signals. Saying "I find this boy beautiful" was like saying "I recognize greatness in the making." Whether or not the boy had a say in that recognition is a harder question, and not one the Greeks wrote down clearly. And while we're here, let's clear up something. Not all Greek men participated in this. There were skeptics, critics, and those who probably rolled their eyes at the entire custom. But for the aristocratic circles of Athens, pederasty was like attending symposiums or reciting Euripides, just part of the package. It was also not universally sexual. Some relationships stayed platonic, others didn't. It varied by region status, and whether the people involved followed the rules, which, as with most human rules, were flexible when no one was watching. Let's not forget Alcibiades, the golden boy of Athens. Flamboyant, brilliant, dangerous. Rumors swirled about who mentored him, who desired him, who he humiliated once he grew into his power. He danced through political scandals and battlefield betrayals, and many believed his early relationships shaped the way he manipulated people later. Was he a product of this system, or just really good at using it? And what about you, the Aramenos of this little thought experiment? Do you feel more educated, or just more observed? You can't say no, not easily. You can't escape the system. You just wait until you've grown enough leg hair to flip the power dynamic or find a safer patron. Either way, you're now fluent in an emotional language built on glances, flattery, and borrowed wisdom. You've memorized the plays, passed the tests, and endured the gaze. But don't hang around too long in the study hall. There's another space where desire takes off its sandals and pours a drink. You wander now into the realm of myth, where the gods behave suspiciously, like wealthy aristocrats with far too much time and ego. If you thought the mentor-student situation was fuzzy, wait until you see what Zeus gets up to when he's bored and everyone else is watching the Olympics. Mortal or immortal, no one seems off limits when he feels a twinkle of affection or perhaps just a spark of mischief. One of his most famous pursuits, a Trojan boy named Ganymede. And no, that's not a metaphor. Zeus doesn't woo from afar. He sends an eagle, swoops down, and lifts Ganymede right off the earth boy sheep and all straight to Olympus. There Ganymede becomes cupbearer to the gods. That's right, an eternal intern with great cheekbones. You picture it now, a teenage boy pouring ambrosia, while gods chuckle and wink, and Hera seethes in the corner because her thunderbolt-hurling husband just abducted another pretty face. No one stops him, of course. When you're the king of the gods, HR doesn't file reports. This myth wasn't told in hushed tones. It was celebrated. Ganymede became a symbol of ideal beauty. Sculptors carved him, poets praised him, and ordinary Athenians nodded knowingly at the story. In a culture that prized male youth and beauty, this wasn't scandal, it was validation. If Zeus desired boys well, then so could you. Divine precedent, the ultimate hall pass. And Zeus wasn't the only one with celestial crushes. Apollo, sun god lyre player, occasional plague bringer, fell for Hyacinthus, a Spartan youth so lovely, the west wind grew jealous. That's right, even breezes had boy troubles. One fateful day, A flying discus, possibly accidentally redirected, kills Hyacinthus, and from his spilled blood, a flower grows. Cue the tragic music. The Greeks didn't just accept these stories, they planted them into their worldview like seasonal rituals. You suffer, you love, you die beautifully, and maybe someone names a plant after you. There's also the tale of Achilles and Patroclus, two warriors bound not just by combat, but depending on who's telling the story, by love. Homer is famously vague, but later writers like Aeschylus and Plato lean into the romantic reading. Achilles avenges Patroclus' death with ferocity that suggests more than friendship. You can picture them now, armor-clashing eyes, locking grief roaring across the battlefield. Their story was retold in symposiums and theater, and later by people looking for brave love in brutal times. What makes these myths so striking isn't just their content, but their delivery. They weren't scandalous footnotes. They were central pillars. Schools taught them. Parents named their children after them. Vase painters captured the scenes in vivid reds and blacks. You'd think, with so many male lovers flying, fighting, or weeping across Greek stories, it might have raised a few questions about boundaries. But no one blinked. These tales didn't challenge social norms, they sculpted them. And that's where things get a little modern feeling. Because who tells the story matters. Imagine growing up hearing bedtime tales where the highest god falls for someone who looks like you. It shapes what you think love should look like. It legitimizes attraction, cloaked in wisdom or tragedy. And it leaves very little room for discomfort, especially if you're the one being pursued, rather than pursuing. There's something powerful and a little dangerous about myth being used as a mirror. When people need to justify their actions, they point upward. If the gods do it, how can it be wrong? That logic has echoed through centuries, hasn't it? From kings to cult leaders, someone always finds a way to wrap desire in divinity. In ancient Greece, they just happened to be a little more honest about it. Of course, not every story was tender or swoon-worthy. Some had teeth. Dionysus, for instance, had a knack for blurring lines, gender sanity, sobriety. He danced with men and women, wore flowing robes, and inspired followers to drop their inhibitions. His cult was a cocktail of liberation and chaos. If Apollo's love was lyrical, Dionysus's was fevered and unhinged. You didn't just fall for someone, you lost yourself in them. You wonder now, did boys in ancient Greece feel seen or trapped by these stories? Did they dream of flying like Ganymede, or dread being swept away? There's no surviving journal entry that says, "Dear Papyrus Zeus made it weird again today." But these stories shaped how people saw the world, just like Disney movies and pop songs do now. Except instead of princes and glass slippers, you've got gods turning into swans and pursuing shepherds across marble hills. Even Heracles, the muscle-bound icon of masculinity, had close relationships with younger male companions. Iolaus, his charioteer and nephew, was more than just a sidekick in some versions. Thebes even held rituals celebrating them as lovers. Think about that public ceremonies in honor of same-sex couples while also worshiping their feats in war. It's hard to draw clean lines between myth, love, and power when all three keep wrapping around each other like ivy on a temple column. So here you are sitting under a fig tree, listening to an elder recite stories of divine love, fatal longing, and poetic vengeance. It doesn't feel foreign. It feels oddly familiar. Myths always do, don't they? Whether they're ancient scrolls or streaming series, they tap into what we hope, what we fear, and what we pretend we're not thinking about at all. But enough lounging in Olympus. Back on Earth, young men are oiling their bodies and heading into a very different kind of stage. You arrive at the gymnasium, and no, this isn't your standard treadmill and mirrors setup. This is ancient Greece's most popular social club intellectual salon, and let's be honest, open-air runway. You take in the scene, sun-kissed courtyards, filled with young men, completely nude, glistening with olive oil stretching wrestling, or pretending to listen to Socratic debates while sneaking glances at each other's biceps. It's not subtle. It's not supposed to be. The gymnasium is where physical beauty meets moral philosophy, and where admiration often lingers longer than it should. You're handed a strigil, the dull metal scraper used to remove sweat and oil, and a little flask of perfumed oil. There's a man nearby who seems far too interested in helping you apply it. He claims he's a trainer. He probably is. He also probably wrote a poem about you last week. And just like that, the gym becomes a theater of male attraction, performance and judgment, equal parts PE class and poetry reading. The Greek word gymnos means naked. So yes, the nudity is deliberate, cultural, and fully normalized. But it's not just for aesthetics. To the Greeks, a beautiful body reflected a beautiful soul. Or at least that was the excuse carved into temple walls. There's an almost religious reverence here, a belief that discipline of the flesh sharpens the mind. The gym is less about burning calories and more about burning away shame. You're not just building muscles, you're crafting moral virtue. Ideally, with very symmetrical thighs. And here's the twist. It's not just young men showing off. Older men attend too. They walk the perimeter, offering feedback on wrestling technique, quoting Plato, or just enjoying the view. It's a respectable pastime with a faint whiff of longing. You can't help but feel like you're being graded, not just for your form, but for how well you carry the attention. Can you act unaffected? Can you flirt without speaking? Can you parry desire with dignity? This is where the concept of kolokagathia lives and breathes beauty and goodness fused together, one justifying the other. The ideal youth is modest, yet magnetic, disciplined, yet desirable. It's a balancing act that even modern Instagram influencers might envy. And yes, there's judgment. Too vain, you're mocked. Too shy, you're invisible. Too old, well, go sit with the philosophers and quote Homer. Remember, this isn't a secret club. Gymnasiums are publicly funded, sometimes even attached to temples. Statesmen and scholars meet here. Boys train for the Olympic Games. Poets scribble in corners. But so do social climbers and not-so-subtle admirers. The power dynamics are as oiled as the body's hierarchies of age, intellect, beauty, and reputation sliding against one another in full daylight. And just like that, you spot a familiar figure, Plato. He's probably scribbling something about ideal forms while keeping an eye on a particularly graceful discus thrower. That's not a joke. Plato often used scenes from the gymnasium as metaphors in his writings. He believed that observing beauty could lead to philosophical truth, which, if you think about it, is one of history's more poetic justifications for people watching. Here's where things get a bit more relatable. Think about a modern high school locker room or a yoga studio with unspoken social codes. There's admiration competition, self-consciousness, and the occasional inappropriate comment, all swirling around like steam. Now multiply that by civic pride, philosophical ambition, and the occasional athletic nudity competition, and you've got the Greek gymnasium. It's not a place to relax, it's a place to be witnessed. Let's not forget that some of these gyms had regulations. In Sparta, for instance, trainers could punish overly flirtatious behavior. In Athens, on the other hand, some of the flirtation was practically encouraged, so long as everyone behaved and no reputations were visibly harmed. The line between appreciation and exploitation was a moving target painted in moral ambiguity and olive oil. Occasionally, you hear about an Erastes gifting a young athlete with expensive gear, better training, or elaborate wreaths. This isn't just generosity, it's courtship. Think of it as ancient sponsorship with feelings. If your performance improves, if your name gains attention, your admirer's social stock rises too. So who's training whom really? Of course, there were critics. Aristophanes, the sharp-tongued playwright, loved mocking men who pretended their gym crushes were all about admiring character. He saw through the philosophy-scented cologne and wasn't afraid to laugh at it. His plays often feature lecherous old men trailing after handsome youths, gasping for love, and making fools of themselves. Ancient satire had very little chill. And while all this posturing unfolds, real friendships and rivalries form. You might spend years wrestling the same boys, running alongside them, hearing their fears, cheering their victories. Physical closeness breeds emotional tension. You wonder if they notice how long your hand stays on their shoulder after a match, or if they're pretending not to notice yours. Just don't trip over your own ambition. Beauty fades. Status shifts. One poorly timed injury, one poorly placed rumor, and you might find yourself alone on the marble steps while someone younger and shinier takes your spot. The gym giveth and taketh away. So you towel off, collect your sandals, and walk past a mural of Heracles embracing Iolaus. No one questions it. It's tradition, it's history, it's decor. You nod at a philosopher who looks like he's halfway between enlightenment and a crush. Then you follow the crowd robes rustling into the next social arena, one with less sweat and far more wine. You follow the scent of roasted nuts, fig cakes, and spiced wine into a tiled courtyard, flickering with oil lamps. This is the symposium, a word that sounds like a modern academic conference, but in reality, it's a late-night gathering where men recline on couches, sip diluted wine, and flirt in hexameter. You're not here to learn, not officially. You're here to observe, to be seen. And maybe if you're clever, make someone important laugh, just enough to remember your name tomorrow. The setup is precise couches, arranged in a U-shape, each guest angled perfectly to both speak and be spoken about. There's always that one guy who brings his own drinking cup. It's unnecessarily ornate and screams overcompensating. The host raises a toast, a lyre twangs in the background, and a boy with perfect hair refills your cup without asking. No one's in a rush. The night is long, and reputations are built in these hours like statues, slowly and with a great deal of artistic license. This isn't a frat party, though. Sometimes it edges uncomfortably close. The wine is diluted, drunkenness is frowned upon, but the talk is intoxicating. Men take turns delivering toasts, poetry, political rants, and sometimes awkward confessions. Someone quotes Sappho carefully, because quoting a woman poet in a room full of powerful men feels just rebellious enough to be fashionable. Another begins describing the ideal lover's body in such lavish detail that it becomes unclear whether this is a metaphor or just very public thirst. But no one stops him. No one blushes. Instead, someone else builds on the theme, turning it into a debate. Is love nobler when it's unfulfilled? Or does desire lose dignity the moment it's satisfied? Plato's Symposium, after all, was set at one of these very gatherings where Socrates sits quietly, listening to a rotating cast of men explain why they love men and what love even means. He mostly listens until it's his turn to confuse everyone. You notice that the younger guests, like yourself, aren't speaking much. You're here to learn the social choreography. A glance means one thing. A well-timed laugh means another. Complimenting someone's sandals. Bold move. Complimenting their soul safer, but also more dangerous, because now you've opened the door to philosophy, and no one escapes Socratic questioning alive. That man with the silver beard, he's been watching you. Is he assessing your wit, your calves, your lineage? Possibly all three. You're reclined, but make no mistake, you're performing. Every gesture, every smile, every silence says something. The symposium is a theater of manners and meanings. The wine merely loosens the language. Somewhere across the room, a flute girl plays a haunting melody, technically not part of the conversation, but everyone knows she sets the mood. She's background music, with eyes that see too much, and then, inevitably, the conversation turns toward Eros love in all its confusing layers. The men around you speak of passion like it's a battle they once fought and won or lost gloriously. Some speak of their first loves, always male, always beautiful, always just out of reach. Others warn against indulgence, spinning tales of lovers gone mad or reputations ruined. A few play the cynic, claiming love is weakness, a form of self-deception, a way to excuse poor decisions in a darkened room. You'd expect mockery, maybe some shame, but the mood isn't cruel. It's contemplative. These aren't dirty jokes passed in secret. They're polished arguments shared aloud. Loving another man, especially a younger one, isn't automatically taboo. It's a matter of how you do it when you do it, and whether you can still speak wisely about it after the passion passes. If love makes you better, stronger, more virtuous, then love is noble. If it distracts you, weakens you, or makes you write bad poetry, then perhaps you've misunderstood the assignment. It's at symposiums like these that reputations are made or dismantled. A single bad toast can haunt you. A clever one can get you invited to more exclusive parties. And those parties, that's where deals are made, alliances formed, marriages arranged, and lovers discreetly promised. Not that anything is openly negotiated, at least not while the servants are still in the room. Now and then, a new guest stumbles into the symposium, halfway through the night, hoping to impress. The regulars watch like hawks. Is he charming or desperate? Is he well-versed in Homer, or just quoting whatever he heard last week? If he mentions Alcibiades, someone will groan. If he compliments Plato's latest work, someone else will raise an eyebrow. You learn quickly this isn't a space for amateurs. It's a verbal wrestling match wrapped in silk. And yet, something vulnerable lives here too. In between jokes and arguments, you catch real moments. Confessions of longing, the soft sighs of a man remembering a love long gone, or a guest suddenly falling silent as someone else quotes a line that lands too close to home. The symposium, like love itself, sways between control and collapse. As dawn creeps across the sky, the wine runs out and sandals are shuffled back onto tired feet. Some men leave arm in arm. Others avoid each other's gaze. You brush crumbs off your tunic and try to remember the names of everyone you just impressed or accidentally offended. Either way, you've survived. You've learned the dance. And somewhere along the way, you saw how cleverness, affection, and desire intermingle in the slow glow of flickering lamps and whispered names. Now wipe the wine from your lip and straighten your robe. Daylight demands a return to duty marriage contracts, and the peculiar dance between public honor and private desire. You return to the street, where stone houses line up like polite lies, each one hiding a contradiction inside. Because here's the part that bends the mind a little. The same men who write poems to boys and debate the nature of male love over wine are also expected without exception to marry women and produce heirs. It's not optional, it's civic duty. You don't get a medal for being a loyal husband, but you do get societal stability, legal standing, and maybe even a respectable tombstone someday. Marriage in ancient Greece isn't a love story, it's a strategic alliance. You marry a woman, typically a decade or two younger, chosen by your family. And you probably first meet her while discussing dowries over goat cheese with her father. Romantic right. Her role is to bear children, keep the house, and definitely not participate in symposiums or philosophical debates. She lives in the gyneconitis, a private part of the house separate from where the men entertain. You could say it's like a backstage area where the actual labor happens while the front of house stays polished and aloof. And yet no one finds it odd that a man might express more emotional depth toward his eromenos than his wife. Public affection for one's wife. A little gauche. Public longing for a beautiful young man. Practically poetry. This isn't hypocrisy, it's hierarchy. Love between men, especially when linked with intellectual or military excellence, is elevated. Love toward women, though necessary, is quietly quarantined from public life. It's the social equivalent of storing your valuables in a chest you never open. Still, the expectations for masculinity are strict. You can admire beauty, pursue a younger man, even mentor him in the art of virtue and war. But don't you dare show weakness. Don't fall apart if he leaves you. Don't beg. Don't cross the line into passive behavior, or you risk being labeled kinaidos, a term used to describe men who were seen as effeminate or too eager to be pursued. In the Greek world, it wasn't who you loved that defined your status. It was how you loved them. Were you the active one, the controlled one, the manly one, or were you viewed as being too soft? This creates an impossible paradox. Love is noble, but feeling too much is shameful. Desire is poetic, but openly enjoying it is dangerous. You're told to care, but not too much. Mentor, but not mother. Desire, but never need. And so men learn to compartmentalize. The wife is the foundation, the lover is the inspiration, and the self is always juggling masks, public virtue, private longing, and internal silence. It makes you wonder, did the wives know? Of course they did. A woman in ancient Greece wasn't clueless, she was just excluded. Her power lived in whispers, in managing households, in raising sons, who might grow up to be someone else's poetic subject. She saw the signs, the favoritism, the quiet departures after dinner. Maybe she grieved it. Maybe she accepted it. Maybe she had secrets of her own. And don't assume this balancing act was easy. The playwright Euripides often used his tragedies to critique marriage and the societal roles thrust upon women. His characters, Medea, Phaedra, Antigone, don't go quietly. They cry out, "Curse the gods," and often make a violent mess of their invisible chains. Through them, we glimpse the emotional cost of a society that demanded appearances over honesty, roles over relationships. You picture a well-dressed Athenian man walking to court in the morning, greeting his neighbor, and nodding to his eromenos from across the street while his wife prepares breakfast for their children. Nothing scandalous, just the rhythm of expectation. He is both respected and restless, admired and slightly absurd, because deep down he knows the balancing act is wearing thin. No one holds that many identities without a few slipping through the cracks. What's curious is how this very structure allowed for so much poetry. The tension between duty and desire gave Greek literature its sharpest lines. It made love feel both dangerous and divine. Poets like Anacreon and Theognis poured out verses to boys they mentored, adored, or lost. Their longing was laced with elegance, but also with codes never too direct, always wrapped in metaphor, like a secret painted on a vase and left to be misinterpreted. Would the modern world tolerate such a system? Probably not. But before we judge too quickly, consider how often people today perform the same balancing act. One face for family, one for romance, and one for the mirror. The only difference is we've replaced marble with Instagram and symposiums with dating apps. The masks haven't vanished. They've just changed material. And somewhere inside this intricate social puzzle, a truth lingers. Love, no matter its form, finds cracks in the walls. It climbs over rules. It writes its name in the margins of marriage contracts and hums softly behind closed doors. You don't need permission to feel it. You just need enough silence to hear it. But love isn't the only thing hiding in the shadows of domestic life. On a distant island, women have carved out a space of their own, one not defined by men, but by music longing and the sea. You step off the mainland and find yourself on the island of Lesbos, where the breeze smells of salt and ink, and the rules feel different. This isn't Athens with its theatrical speeches and rigid categories. This is a place where poetry lives in the throat, where girls gather to learn more than grammar, and where one woman's voice echoes across centuries with the kind of intimacy that still makes readers pause. Her name is Sappho, and if the mainland built its reputation on men loving boys, Lesbos wrote its legacy in women loving women. You imagine walking through her Thiassos, a circle of young women under Sappho's guidance. It's part finishing school, part literary salon, and possibly part quiet revolution. The girls study music, recite hymns, and write verses about desire so delicate they feel like whispers pressed onto papyrus. Sappho isn't trying to shock anyone. She's just writing honestly, which ironically is exactly what makes her dangerous. Her poems aren't political treatises. They're fragments of feelings, a stolen glance, a skipped heartbeat, a longing that stings. She doesn't describe female love as exotic or shameful. It's just there like a sunset or an ache in the ribs. Sometimes she names the girl. Sometimes the girl leaves. Often she simply sighs. And that sigh, it holds more truth than a dozen symposium toasts. And yet you can almost hear the scribes of later centuries shuffling awkwardly. Roman editors tried to clean her up medieval monks, skipped over her entirely, and Victorian scholars translated beloved woman into dear friend with such stiffness you could build a chair out of it. You can't really erase a voice like Sappho's, but you can muffle it, which history did page by page until her verses were scattered like confetti found in Egyptian rubbish, heaps recycled into mummy wrappings, and finally reassembled centuries later with the reverence of someone piecing together a spell. You might ask, did people at the time view her love as scandalous? Possibly. But it's hard to say. Her poetry wasn't hidden, it was performed. Sung passed along. She was respected, celebrated, even called the 10th Muse. Plato, yes, that Plato referred to her as wise. That doesn't sound like someone society tried to silence in her own lifetime. It sounds like someone whose power was obvious and perhaps too effortless to fully control. The island itself adds to the legend. Lesbos becomes shorthand. A geographic identity turns into a coded one. And while we can't know the exact contours of female relationships, there were they, romantic, platonic, poetic, all of the above. We know this women in Lesbos were writing themselves into the story. And not just as wives, mothers, or metaphors, but as subjects, as speakers, as lovers. There's something almost rebellious about the quietude of it all. No symposiums, no naked wrestling, just words, just memory, just a young woman sitting on a rooftop, clutching a reed pen, and wondering if the girl she wrote about will ever read what she's just composed. Sappho's power isn't in grandeur, it's in how she makes you feel like she's writing only to you. You think about how this contrasts with the male-centered love celebrated in Athens. There, beauty is a social tool, a form of currency. Here on Lesbos, it feels more private, more lived in. It's not about performance, it's about presence. You don't see the same hierarchy, the older mentor, the younger subject. You see equals, or something closer to it. The emotions aren't dressed up as duty. They're allowed to ache. Even now, scholars argue over how much of Sappho's love was literal versus literary. Did she actually sleep with her students? Was the school a sanctuary or something more scandalous? But maybe those are the wrong questions. Maybe the point isn't what happened, but what was felt, and how boldly she allowed herself to feel it. Sappho's words have a peculiar longevity. In a world that likes its heroes loud and its lovers tragic, she was neither. She just existed. Her voice, half erased, still breaks through with lines like "Someone will remember us," and "Someone always does." She wrote fewer surviving poems than some modern pop stars have Instagram captions, yet her impact ripples endlessly. And perhaps that's the secret. Love, when expressed with honesty, refuses to rot. It clings to edges, seeps through cracks, finds its way into the hands of readers who need it most. Some of Sappho's poems are just single lines fragments, but even those fragments carry a pulse like a song you only half remember, yet still hum when you're alone. You leave Lesbos quietly, not wanting to disrupt the rhythm of the waves or the gentle silence of her verses. You wonder how many other voices were lost, how many women wrote and burned or whispered and disappeared. History has a habit of losing what it finds inconvenient, especially when the inconvenient thing wears a dress and speaks in lyric meter. Still, Sappho remains half shadow, half siren. And the world she hints at, it never really vanished. It just learned to hide better. Now, as your boat drifts toward the mainland again, a different kind of love waits, one sharpened by training, duty, and discipline, and a culture where affection is armor. You dock in Sparta, and almost immediately you feel the shift, not in the weather, but in the weight of the silence. Athens was noisy with debates and flute music. Lesbos hummed with verse and sea wind. But Sparta marches. Sparta drills. Even its affection feels like it could snap a spear in half. Here, relationships between men aren't dressed up in philosophy or sung to the lyre. They're woven into war. As a young Spartan male, you're taken from your family at age 7 and thrust into the agage, a rigorous state-run education system that's less finishing school and more survive or be forgotten. You eat, sleep, fight, and grow with the same boys for years. The result isn't just camaraderie. It's a deep emotional bond, built in bruises and shared hunger. The kind of closeness that doesn't need poetry, because it's carved directly into the body. And unlike Athens, Sparta doesn't dance around it. The idea that older warriors would form attachments, physical emotional, or both with younger trainees wasn't seen as immoral. It was encouraged. Why? Because as the logic went, you fight harder for someone you love. A warrior doesn't just defend the city. He defends the one who saw him stumble during drills, the one who helped bandage his foot, the one he slept beside every night since he was 12. War is brutal. Affection is armor. These relationships, called inspirational mentorships by some later scholars, aren't precisely detailed in Spartan records. That's because Sparta didn't write much down. They preferred deeds to words. So what we know comes filtered through the eyes of outsiders, especially Athenian ones, who found the whole arrangement both fascinating and terrifying. To them, Spartan love was a little too sweaty, a little too quiet, a little too loyal. You imagine now a pair of young warriors sparring beneath the pine trees. One knocks the other down. There's blood on the lip, a smile, and no words exchanged. They're not composing odes about each other's eyelashes. They're memorizing every weakness and strength, because someday they'll stand shield to shield in a phalanx, and nothing, not the fear, not the enemy, will break through that bond. And here's a twist you didn't expect. While Athens prided itself on intellectual romance, Sparta wove love directly into its military machine. A soldier who performed well in training might be paired with an older mentor who guided him not just in tactics, but in self-control, moral discipline, and yes, sometimes intimacy. It wasn't considered taboo. It was considered training. This doesn't mean Sparta was a paradise of acceptance. Like everywhere else in Greece, roles mattered. Power dynamics mattered. Passive behavior, particularly in older men, could still draw ridicule. Masculinity here was strict and unforgiving. But the presence of emotional and physical bonds between men wasn't denied. It was folded directly into national pride. Compare this to Athens, where such bonds were framed through aesthetics and balance. In Sparta, there's no discussion about the ethics of desire. There's only one question: will he hold the line? Love isn't just a feeling, it's motivation. If you've ever run faster because someone you admired was watching, or lifted heavier to impress someone you hoped would notice, you already understand the Spartan system. Now imagine that system weaponized. In some accounts, entire military units were built on bonded pairs. The most famous example, though not Spartan, was Thebes' Sacred Band, an elite fighting force composed of 150 couples. Their love was their shield. The idea was simple. No one flees the battlefield when the one they love is right beside them. This concept traces its roots to Spartan ideals, where bravery wasn't just civic, it was personal. And yet when these warriors went home, they were expected to marry, father children, and never speak too openly about the relationships that carried them through their youth. Sparta was a paradox, accepting of male love in private function, but demanding conformity in public life. Emotions were useful, but not to be indulged. Passion was valuable, but only if it sharpened your blade. You wonder if that left a kind of ache. The kind of ache that doesn't bleed, but hums under the surface like an old bruise. Did former lovers pass each other in the agora with a nod and a silence too deep for words? Did their wives sense the history in a glance exchanged across a courtyard? The Spartans wouldn't have written it down, but you can feel it lingering in the stone, in the silence of a culture that used love like a sword sharp hidden and always close to the heart. So while Athens debated and Lesbos sang, Sparta loved quietly and bled loudly. Their form of love didn't quote poetry. It grunted. It trained. It stood in formation and didn't flinch when the arrows came. Now, as you walk away from the drills and discipline your sandals crunching against the red clay of the Spartan road, you start to wonder what happens when love that was once encouraged suddenly faces the weight of law. Not every Greek city was so accepting. Some had rules, some had loopholes, and some just had shame wrapped in ceremony. You step carefully now, because the stones beneath your feet are legal ones, slick with precedent and tangled with contradiction. In some Greek cities, love between males is encouraged in murals and melodies. In others, it's nudged into shadows with a smile that says, "We know, but don't say it too loud." And across all of them, there are laws not banning desire exactly, but fencing it in with rules about decorum, reputation, and how not to embarrass yourself at a dinner party. Athens again offers the clearest case study. You've already seen its gymnasiums and symposiums, but now you find yourself in the city courts listening to a man deliver a scathing speech. He's not attacking someone for being gay, as we define it today, but for acting shamefully in a way that undermines his manhood. The insult that the man took a passive role, that he acted in the courtroom's terms like a woman. And in this culture, that accusation burns hotter than any confession of desire itself. You pause. So it's not about who someone loves. It's about how they love. Exactly. The law didn't criminalize same-sex attraction. But if a man was known to be too available, too effeminate, too obvious in his longing, he could lose his citizenship rights. That meant no speaking in the assembly, no holding office, no voting. You weren't arrested. You were erased. Take the case of Timarchus, a young man whose political opponent Aeschines accused him of having been a paid companion to older men in his youth. Not illegal per se, but dishonorable. The real weapon wasn't the deed, it was the loss of dignity attached to it. The message, you can desire beauty, you can even act on it, but don't ever let anyone say you gave away your pride along with your belt. This legal tightrope led to some impressively acrobatic behavior. Older men would pursue younger ones with elaborate gifts, poetry, and public admiration, while the boys were expected to resist, at least initially. The chase was part of the ritual. Accepting too quickly could suggest you were eager, desperate even, which could damage your family's reputation. So instead, the youth learned to deflect with style. Compliments were met with coy philosophy, gifts with conditions. It was a courtship that required both grace and plausible deniability. You begin to realize this wasn't about hiding relationships. It was about choreographing them. There were unwritten scripts to follow. You could admire a boy in public, but too much praise risked making him look like a trophy rather than a person. You could write him poems, but if they were too explicit, they might be used against you in court. Even love had footnotes here. And don't forget the power of ridicule. The comic stage, especially in Aristophanes' plays, delighted in mocking men who stepped outside their assigned roles. The Knidos, the man seen as passive or flamboyant, was a favorite target not because he loved men, but because he didn't hide it well enough. Laughter could ruin reputations faster than any trial. If you ever thought middle school was brutal, try being mocked in front of an amphitheater full of rowdy Athenians while wearing a fake phallus on stage. Yet for all the risk, people still loved, still reached out, still found loopholes. You could celebrate beauty, an art slip a lover's name into a coded poem, dedicate a statue with just enough ambiguity to avoid scandal. There were even drinking cups painted with scenes of male affection, cleverly passed around at symposiums as conversation starters. The laws weren't meant to stop desire. They were meant to keep it in line with appearances. The heart could wander, but the face had to smile just right. It reminds you of cultures today, where being openly affectionate in certain ways might be accepted, but only if wrapped in enough irony, subtlety, or silence. Some things change. Others just evolve into different shapes. Even in more conservative cities like Corinth or Delphi, the same patterns played out. There were temple rituals, local customs, and regional nuances, but always the tension between expression and expectation hummed beneath the surface. Public identity was sacred in Greece, and love, however profound, was expected to respect the mask. There's a strange comfort in that contradiction. Because despite the laws, despite the shame games and gossip, the desire didn't disappear. It adapted. You imagine two boys walking home from the gym, not touching, not speaking of what they feel, but brushing fingers just slightly as they pass through a columned alley. That moment, quiet and dangerous, says more than any courtroom decree. So here you are in a world that both celebrated and censored. That built statues to beauty while punishing the wrong kind of glance. A world where the heart had to learn patience, cleverness, and the art of the slow reveal. But law can't reach everywhere. It certainly doesn't reach the minds of philosophers, especially those who made entire careers out of redefining love, one well-timed question at a time. You follow the dusty footpath into a shaded grove where Socrates lingers under a tree, surrounded by pupils who nod scribble and occasionally look like they'd rather be anywhere else. This isn't a classroom exactly. It's more like a verbal obstacle course. Questions lead to more questions. Answers are traps, and love. Oh, love is the trickiest puzzle of all. Welcome to the world of the philosophers, where nothing is what it seems, especially not your feelings. You think you're here for a lecture, but what unfolds feels more like a slow unraveling of your mind. The topic today is eros, the passionate consuming kind of love. Socrates, with his famously snubbed nose and bare feet, doesn't lecture you about morals or law. Instead, he asks, what does love want? Why do we desire beauty? Is it the body we chase, or the soul it hides? The conversation eventually drifts into dangerous territory. Dangerous, not because it's scandalous, but because it's so persuasive. Socrates in Plato's Symposium builds a staircase of thought. First, we love one beautiful body. Then we realize all beautiful bodies are reflections of a greater truth. Then we fall in love with the beauty of minds, then of knowledge, then finally of the divine itself. It's love as an elevator lifting you towards something eternal. A clever trick, really. You start off with a crush and end up with metaphysics. But the setting isn't abstract. It's still Athens. The participants in this philosophical circle, Plato, Phaedrus, Alcibiades, are real men, many of them entwined in romantic or erotic relationships. And none of them pretend otherwise. Plato, for all his soaring theories, doesn't erase the body. He elevates it through layers of thought until you almost forget the sweat and sighs that inspired them. And then Alcibiades crashes the party. Loud, drunk, and dramatic, he delivers the speech no one asked for, and maybe the most honest one of the night. He recounts how he tried to seduce Socrates, offering his beauty in exchange for wisdom. Socrates refused, not because he lacked desire, but because he wanted something different, deeper, maybe purer. Or Maybe Socrates was just very good at playing hard to get. Either way, Alcibiades is wounded. Not humiliated exactly, but exposed. His confession turns the philosophical symposium into something messier, something recognizably human. Love isn't just an intellectual assent. Sometimes it's about wanting someone to want you back, even if they're barefoot and impossible to impress. You glance around the grove and realize everyone here is acting out their own theory of love. For some, it's mentorship. For others, it's longing. For a few, it's both. And for the philosophers, it's a riddle wrapped in a compliment tied up with a reference to Hesiod. Even Aristotle, who later tried to classify everything like a well-meaning librarian, waded into these waters. He acknowledged that friendships between men could be noble, especially when rooted in shared virtue. He just warned against being swept away. Passion to him was fine until it distracted you from your civic responsibilities, which is a very Aristotle thing to say. You start to see the game. Love in philosophical Greece wasn't about gender, it was about meaning. The best kind of love, they insisted, was the kind that made you better, smarter, braver, wiser, and if it also happened to involve glances across the gymnasium or gifts exchanged under fig trees, so be it. Just don't forget to become more virtuous along the way. Of course, all of this conveniently overlooked the messier bits, the jealousy, the heartbreak, the power imbalances. Philosophers weren't immune to those things, they just gave them better names. What you call ghosting today, Plato might call transcending the lower forms of desire. Same ache, fancier scroll. Still, there's something beautiful in how seriously they took love. It wasn't trivial. It wasn't dismissed. It was dissected, honored, feared. For Socrates and his followers, love wasn't just a pastime, it was a spiritual technology, a way to climb toward truth using beauty as your ladder. Each rung a conversation, each glance a hypothesis. You think back to that moment in the symposium when everyone has spoken and the wine is running low, and someone finally asks the question that hangs in every room, but rarely gets voiced. What do we actually want from each other? Not just physically, not just socially, but deeply, enduringly. The Greeks didn't have a single answer, but they weren't afraid to ask. And in that asking, they created a space for love that was at once idealistic and intimate, a space where men could love other men and call it learning, where relationships weren't hidden but layered, not shameful but complex, not always easy, but always worthy of debate. You leave the grove with your head spinning and your sandals full of dust. You've heard ideas that still ripple through centuries of literature, theology, and psychology. Love, according to the philosophers, is the beginning of wisdom, which may explain why so many of them never really stop talking about it. But what happens when those ideas are rewritten? When cultures change? When love once debated in the open gets locked behind newer doors? You're not done walking yet. There's one more path to follow. The one where whispers become edits, and where history starts to tidy up what was never tidy to begin with. You're still walking, but the air feels different now, heavier, like someone's taken a broom to history and swept whole conversations under the rug. You've wandered from gymnasiums and symposiums, left behind the debates and desire, and entered a world where people start pretending none of it ever happened. Not openly, not all at once, just quietly. This is where the untold history begins to vanish. Not in fire, but in edits. The Romans arrive, and with them, a different moral framework. Not because they were prudish, let's not pretend that, but because their ideals of masculinity and public virtue start to squeeze out the Greek model. They borrow the art quote. The philosophers imitate the style, but with a twist. Suddenly, that noble love between Erastes and Eromenos, it becomes suspicious. Greek poetry is still admired, but only in translation. Statues are still admired, but mostly for their craftsmanship. The emotional core starts to harden into marble. And just like that, admiration turns into artifact. What was once lived experience becomes exhibit. Love is no longer debated. It's dissected, cataloged, and politely misunderstood. You pass a Roman scholar looking at a Greek vase with two men embracing. He nods, furrows his brow, then jots something in his scroll that completely misses the point. It's not malicious. It's something worse. It's indifferent. Rome doesn't erase the Greeks. It freezes them, turns them into myth safe behind glass. Then comes Christianity. Not all at once, history never works in clean lines, but eventually you hear a new voice rising, one that speaks not in riddles or stanzas, but in commandments. Love is still sacred, but now there are rules, absolutes, borders, and the ambiguous layered love that danced through Plato and sang through Sappho. It gets nervous. It changes its clothes. It starts to whisper. Scrolls are lost. Libraries burn. Some works are copied, selectively edited by monks who frown at certain passages, rephrase others, or omit them entirely. By the time Sappho reaches a medieval reader, she's barely a silhouette. Plato is reinterpreted, made more acceptable. The long, rich tradition of same-sex affection becomes a ghost in its own house. But it doesn't disappear. Not really. You find it in footnotes, marginalia, in scraps of parchment stuffed into monastery walls. A line that shouldn't be there. A metaphor that glows a little too brightly. A pause in a sermon when someone remembers that even saints were once young men, looking at other young men with a little too much reverence. And then the Renaissance arrives, pretending it's all new. Sculptors rediscover the male form. Painters lean into myth with winks. Scholars re-examine the Greeks as if they were mysterious strangers rather than long-lost relatives. Michelangelo carves David, and everyone pretends it's just about ideal proportions. Sure it is. You spot a 17th century academic defending Socratic love, but carefully, cautiously. He says it's about wisdom, not lust. Inspiration, not intimacy. It's the same dance, just with different shoes. The heart of the old ideas is still beating, but now it wears a disguise. Even in the Enlightenment, when rationality reigns, and the Greeks are held up as the blueprint for civilization, no one dares admit how human those ancient thinkers really were. How complicated, how tender. Instead, Plato becomes a system. Sappho becomes a curiosity. The love that once strutted boldly through the gymnasium now hides behind allegory. It's not until much later, 19th, the 20th, the 21st centuries, that scholars begin to peel back the edits to listen to what was really being said in those ancient verses and dialogues. You start to see translations that don't flinch, analyses that don't assume. Whole libraries get reevaluated, and suddenly the Greeks stop being statues again. They breathe, they blush. They become awkward, messy, hopeful people once more. But even now, there's resistance. The untold history of homosexuality in ancient Greece isn't untold because it's hidden. It's untold because it makes people uncomfortable, because it refuses to fit neatly into binaries, timelines, or slogans, because it reminds us that identity is fluid, that culture is layered, and that love, real love, doesn't always care about what century you're in. So you walk finally to the edge of the city. The temples are behind you. The scrolls are quiet, but you carry with you all those voices. The boys in the gym, the philosophers under the tree, the poet on her island, the soldier gripping a shield, not just for his country, but for the boy he once kissed behind the barracks. And if you pause in the silence, you might hear them still. Not shouting, not demanding, just existing, as they always did. And you're not a visitor anymore. You're a witness to history that was never truly forgotten, just waiting for someone curious enough to stop, look past the edits, and remember. You wake to the scent of something warm and leavened bread, but not the kind most people chew through like punishment. No, your bread is white, refined, silky almost. It doesn't crumble like peasant barley loaves or scratch your throat with leftover bran. This is manchet bread, the kind kneaded with the softest part of wheat flour baked golden in ovens, fueled by wood no one chopped personally. You don't even think about where it came from. Bread just appears stacked in woven baskets, wrapped in linen, cut into little rounds if someone's feeling fancy. Sometimes it's baked with milk or honey. Other times it's sculpted into shapes for no reason other than showing off. What makes your bread different isn't just the wheat, it's the status. In a time where most people eat bread with ground peas or sawdust filler, your crust is a class announcement. It says, I have land. I have laborers. I don't chew twigs for breakfast. The contrast is almost comical. You nibble your soft morning slice while someone outside is gnawing a black brick baked 3 days ago over a smoky fire. Their bread is survival. Yours is ceremony. And you don't eat it plain. Not when the pantry bursts with options. You might smear on a bit of fresh churned butter or some fig jam imported from warmer places. You might even dip it into wine because yes, even your breakfast wine has a job to do. Nobody trusts the water, not even you. Sometimes you'll get a trencher that's a chunkier round of bread, used as a plate for stews or meats. After the meal, servants might eat it soaked in your leftovers. Or dogs. Or if it's a feast, the trenchers are collected and donated to the poor. Cold generosity in bread form. And no, they don't complain. They're glad it once touched your meat. Still, bread is only the start. The real power move comes next. You sit at the long carved table in the great hall, cloth-spread pewter cup, filled the rushes on the floor, freshly changed to mask the smell of last week's dinners and this week's feet. A servant bows, brings out a covered platter, and what's under it could never be confused for anything found in a peasant pot. Let's talk about meat. Lots of it. Meat isn't just food, it's your birthright. If you're rich in medieval times, you don't eat to live. You eat to dominate. You pile your plate with roasted swan, boar's head venison haunches, and capons stuffed with herbs you can't even name. You want variety, yes, but more importantly, you want quantity. A meal with only one kind of meat feels suspiciously monk-like. Are you fasting? Are you poor? Are you Protestant? The roasted smells hit your nose before the platters even reach the table. Goose dripping with fat pork crusted with herbs. Tiny songbirds grilled and skewered in obscene little pyramids. Meat glistens under candlelight like a parade of edible trophies. If it once breathed and walked or flew or squealed, it belongs here. But let's not pretend you killed any of this yourself. That's not how your world works. The meat gets hunted for you, poached from royal forests, or raised on your estates. In fact, you might have a master of the hunt on payroll whose only job is to make sure your next banquet doesn't feature the same boring deer twice. Game meats are high-fashion pheasants, partridges, and anything else hard to catch. Even hedgehogs, if you're feeling theatrical. And if it's a feast day, or honestly a regular Tuesday, you throw in spectacle. Like that time, they brought in an entire peacock, roasted, but redressed in its own feathers, posed on the platter like it just flew in from the Garden of Eden. It's not even that tasty. But that's beside the point. You're not eating it for flavor. You're eating it because it's basically a bird wearing jewelry. Sometimes, just to be dramatic, they serve fake animals, like a pig sewn with the head of a goose, stuffed with minced hair dyed with saffron until it glows like something radioactive. You don't flinch. That's dinner. Or performance art. Hard to tell. And if you're wondering about vegetables, no, you're not. That's what the staff eats, or monks, or invalids. You'll accept the occasional onion in a stew, maybe a carrot if it's been boiled into submission. But rich people don't munch on salads. Raw greens belong in fields or hanging out of a goat's mouth, not beside your venison pie. Your cook, of course, is working behind the scenes like a medieval Michelin chef, constantly inventing new ways to impress your mouth and your guests' egos. There's always a new glaze, a more scandalous spice, a jaw-dropping centerpiece to outdo whatever your rival lord served last week. One-upmanship is the true condiment. Think that's excessive. Think again. In 1387, King Richard II's coronation feast reportedly served thousands of dishes. Swans, herons, porpoises, even whales. Because nothing says, "I'm holy and chosen by God," like eating something that swims next to a bishop. And sure, peasants might get the occasional scrap of pork belly once a year, maybe some bacon if they've hoarded enough salt. But you'd be offended if you went one full day without meat. Even your fasts come with loopholes which you'll get to taste soon enough. First, though, there's another aquatic category that slips its way onto your plate, whether you're pious or just peckish fish. Fish swims into your life whether you want it or not. Because even if you're rich, even if your castle pantry smells more like roast goose than a seaside dock, the church still rules your stomach. And the church says no meat on Fridays, or Wednesdays, or feast days, or Lent, or Advent. Basically, if you blink wrong, it's a fasting day, and fish becomes the loophole wrapped in scales. But don't worry, you're not stuck chewing dried cod like some sailor rationing food on a leaky boat. Your fish is dressed to impress. Baked in pastry, stewed in wine, layered with almonds, or crusted in pepper, worth more than your grandmother's dowry. You don't fast, you pivot. That's the rich person advantage. You might start with lamprey. Yes, the eel-like thing, with a face only a medieval noble could love. It's boiled into oblivion, mixed with spices and wine, and sometimes baked into a pie, so elaborate it arrives on the table shaped like a castle. No one's sure if it tastes good. But when King Henry I reportedly died from a surfeit of lampreys, you know it had to be elite. Sometimes the fish itself doesn't even look like fish anymore. Your cook might take 2 whole pike, twist them into an S-shape, dye them with saffron and parsley juice, and stitch on scales made of pastry. You won't even recognize what you're eating, and that's the point. Food is theater. Taste is optional. Salted fish is always on hand, cod herring, or whatever managed to flop its way from the coast to your manor without rotting. And don't imagine it's bland. These slabs of preservation are soaked, boiled, fried, doused in mustard sauce, and surrounded by spices raided from half the known world. You eat it with pickled things. You eat it with onions. You eat it because it proves your kitchen staff knows what they're doing. On occasion, you indulge in freshwater fish from your own estate ponds. Rich people in medieval Europe weren't just collecting land, they were collecting lakes. Carp trout and tench swam not for pleasure, but for your convenience. Owning your own body of water wasn't just useful, it was fashionable. Monasteries and nobles competed to see who could breed the fattest fish. Think of it like high-stakes aquarium keeping, but everything eventually ends up in garlic sauce. And don't forget eels. Eels are everywhere. Boiled, jellied, fried, or packed into pie crusts until they wiggle with regret. In some noble households, servants might pay part of their rent in eels. It's weirdly efficient and deeply unsettling. By the way, have you ever heard of a fish feast with 100 dishes? It wasn't a flex, it was expected. When Archbishop Neville of York hosted a banquet in 1465, he included hundreds of fish-based offerings. Roach perch, bream whale tongue porpoise. Even seals made the menu. Technically fish maybe, spiritually seafood. Close enough. That's the medieval trick, follow the letter of the fast, not the spirit. Which explains why some dishes arrive disguised like faux meat pies made from fish, molded and painted to look like roast beef. You eat them with a straight face, while monks peek from the shadows pretending they're not jealous. Of course, fish means status. Ordinary folk might eat sprats or the occasional salted herring. But you bring out sturgeon in aspic. You host oyster courses. You casually mention that your eels were from London, not the river here. Because even among fish, there's a class hierarchy. And you sit at the top. Now that your palate has been baptized in brine and blessed with saffron, it's time for a little something aged and sharp. Because if you're truly wealthy, you don't let anything spoil. You turn it into cheese. Cheese isn't just what you eat when nothing else is ready. It's a quiet show of wealth, a dairy product with a pedigree. You don't grab a wedge from a basket like a harried peasant, hoping it's not moldy. Your cheese arrives from cellars cloaked in cloth, aged like a noble's grudge, and occasionally soaked in wine because why not you taste it like a connoisseur, even if you're not entirely sure what you're tasting. Hard cheeses from your own estate goats, soft ones delivered from monasteries, pungent wheels imported from France if you're feeling international. You cut them with delicate knives. You pair them with crusty bread-spiced fruit or nuts soaked in honey. You never, under any circumstances, ask if the smell is normal. And no cheese isn't dessert, not for someone of your rank. In medieval high society, cheese comes mid-meal, or as a transition dish, something to bridge the gap between heavy meats and whatever spectacle is being baked in the pastry kitchen. You treat cheese like a pause button with flavor. Ever wonder why rich people could even afford cheese in the first place? Because they had land livestock and a staff of servants who milked, stirred, strained, pressed, and aged the stuff under watchful eyes. Some cheeses took months to mature properly. You didn't just eat it, you invested in it. Think of it like the medieval version of letting wine breathe, except it occasionally grows a rind thick enough to be armor. Sometimes you show off your cheese collection the way modern billionaires show off their car keys. Ah yes, that one was matured in walnut leaves.
Look at this place.
Or, this batch is from a monastery that only makes 12 wheels a year. Your guests nod politely. The monks starve slightly. The balance remains. If you traveled to Italy, or imported like many nobles did, You'd hear of Parmesan being shipped in whole wheels, stacked in noble kitchens like edible treasure chests. Those weren't just for grating over food. They were diplomatic gifts, wedding dowries, legal bribes even. One wheel of hard cheese could speak louder than gold in the right situation. Even your local monks understood the value. Cistercian and Benedictine monasteries became known for regional cheeses that practically demanded respect. Rich folks, like you, didn't just buy cheese from them, you funded their cheese experiments. Because let's face it, every feast needs a moment of smug silence while people chew something aged to perfection. Some nobles even designed their own cheese rooms. Cool, dry, stone-lined spaces with controlled airflow tucked under staircases or behind thick wooden doors. Not everyone got to visit. Not everyone was trusted not to sample. Of course, the lower classes had cheese too, but it wasn't the same. Their cheese was sourer, softer, eaten young because it couldn't be stored. It was cottage cheese with more cottage than class. Your cheese, by contrast, could last months, could inspire poetry, could end wars. Maybe. Ever hear the tale of Eleanor of Aquitaine's traveling kitchen? One chronicler noted her provisions included wheels of cheese so large they required oxen to cart them. Now, whether that's entirely true or just royal exaggeration is up for debate, but either way, you're not surprised. So yes, your cheese is elegant, it's cultured, it's mildly threatening, and you savor every bite, because what comes next is fiery floral and could bankrupt a small kingdom if spilled the spice rack. Spices, tiny flakes, powders, and shards that cost more than gold and travel farther than most nobles ever will. You don't just use spices, you wield them. They are your social currency, your edible jewelry, your proof that you are not only rich, but globally connected. Every shake of cinnamon, every hint of clove is a whispered flex. And yes, your kitchen staff guards the spice chest like it holds royal secrets. Because in many ways, it does. You think salt is common now. Back then, salt could be a tax, a wage, or a war starter. But you don't waste time showing off salt. Salt is for preserving.
Did you hear that?
Spices are for power. You have black pepper, from India saffron from Spain, or the Levant nutmeg from somewhere far beyond maps, and cinnamon, scraped from the bark of trees that most of your guests think are mythical. You sprinkle ginger into meat pies, cloves into stewed fruits, and saffron into everything you want to glow like sunlight and taste like wealth. If it doesn't sting the tongue a little, or smell like a foreign bazaar, is it even noble food? And the quantities. Let's be honest, you don't know restraint. Your cooks throw pepper into sauces like it grows in the garden outside. They paint roasts with spice mixtures so thick they look lacquered. They dust pastries with imported sugar, dyed pink or green, with crushed herbs, beetroot, or heaven knows what else. You don't season to enhance. You season to stun. Why the obsession? Because in a world where meat is common among the upper class and bread is a given, spices separate the simply rich from the absurdly powerful. Spices were so valuable. They had their own locked cupboards, spice cabinets, often kept in the Lord's own chamber. A servant might hold the key, or you might wear it on a chain around your neck, right next to your crucifix. Priorities. There's also the matter of digestion, or at least the medieval belief in it. Everything you eat is carefully balanced according to humoral theory, hot and dry. Add something cold and moist. Saffron is warm. Vinegar is cool. Sugar is neutral, but makes everything feel better. You don't just eat, you recalibrate your inner cosmos with every dish. And when guests arrive, You bring out your spice display the way modern hosts show off their wine collection. Would you like the roast with a hint of long pepper, or perhaps a saffron glaze? Never mind that most of them can't tell the difference. You can, or at least your chef can. That's what matters. If you want a fun comparison, imagine going to a dinner party today where someone offers you gold flakes on your ice cream truffle oil, on your mashed potatoes, and coffee made from beans that pass through an exotic animal. Now imagine that's every dinner. That's your life. You don't impress people with how much you eat. You impress them with how many continents your plate has visited. Let's not forget the ultimate spice, showstopper sugar. Yes, technically, it's a spice. And yes, it's about to become a whole course of its own. But here, in the middle of your main meal, it gets used like fairy dust. You toss it on rice. You stir it into sauces. You blend it with almonds into a paste that can be molded into fake castles, edible animals, or if your cook is feeling bold, a likeness of your own face. Because who doesn't want to eat a sugar sculpture of themselves? Even spices you don't love make appearances. Because at this level of wealth, taste is optional, but presentation is sacred. And nothing says I'm more important than you, like seasoning a meal with something no one at the table can pronounce. But even amid this culinary theater of spice and shine, something simpler occasionally appears fruit. Only it's not the kind you'd pick off a tree. Fruit in your world rarely looks like fruit anymore. If it's raw, it's suspicious. If it's fresh, it's fleeting. And if it's unpeeled, untouched, and unsweetened, it might as well be a crime against class. Because for someone of your status, fruit must be cooked, preserved, spiced, or baked until it forgets it ever grew on a tree. You don't just pluck an apple and bite into it. That's for shepherds, beggars, or poets wandering through fields. You, on the other hand, might be served apples stewed with wine, and cloves, or pears baked in honey, and wrapped in a pastry shell so rich it could pay a monk's salary. Your figs arrive stuffed with almonds. Your cherries are soaked in syrup until they glisten like rubies rescued from a boiling pot. It's not about the vitamins, it's about the transformation. Medieval noble dining isn't interested in nature. It's interested in mastery over it. Turning ordinary produce into elevated art is how you prove your sophistication. Why settle for a simple plum when you can have plum tart spiced with cinnamon, sweetened with imported sugar, and presented in a dough lattice more intricate than most embroidery? Take quinces, for example, those tough tart cousins of apples. You don't eat them raw. You boil them into mush, mix them with honey, and pour them into molds. The result? Quince paste, often known as medieval jelly, sliced and served like gold bars of fruity achievement. It might not be your favorite thing on the table, but it's there. It says you can afford fruit after it's been worked on for days. And that's the secret. Raw fruit is nature. Cooked fruit is wealth. Your guests won't remember the taste. They'll remember the effort and how many kitchen staff it must have taken to peel core candy simmer and plate it all before sunset. Sometimes, just to impress you, serve fruits out of season. That's real power. In winter, when the land is dead and the orchards look like skeleton hands, you casually present preserved plums, dried figs, or candied orange peels. It's culinary sorcery. It's time travel on a plate. And it usually involves a cellar full of jars, a lot of sugar, and several apprentices who now hate apricots forever. Let's be honest, some of the most admired dishes at your table taste more like potpourri than produce. You've got rose petal jam, violet syrup, and candied anise seeds. Nobody's sure if they're meant to be eaten or sniffed, but they get passed around anyway, oohed and awed over, then pushed politely to the edge of the plate. It doesn't matter. You've already made your point. Even your flowers are edible. Want a modern comparison? Imagine ordering a salad and being handed a sculpture made entirely of fruit, leather-dried blossoms, and cinnamon-dusted pear slices arranged like a Tudor crown. You wouldn't eat it for nutrition. You'd post it on Instagram if Instagram existed, which it doesn't, but the urge to show off eternal. You might even pull a page from real medieval history and present an entire table display of fake fruit made from almond paste called marchpane. Molded, painted, and lacquered, these weren't just desserts, they were declarations. Behold, they said, I am so rich, even my apples are lies. Queen Elizabeth. I herself was known for her fondness for marchpane creations, elaborate, almost too pretty to eat, often shaped into coats of arms or mythical creatures. And though she reigned in a slightly later era, the message remained the same: fruit is for playing with, not surviving on. So yes, your fruit is art. It's chemistry. It's a sugar-laced, spice-laced, barely recognizable relic of the orchard it came from. Which brings us to the obvious question: if fruit already tastes like dessert, what in the name of Saint-Honoré do you serve after dinner? The answer? Sugar. Even more of it. Woven into wonders so lavish they make your candied plums look like breakfast. Dessert, in your world, isn't just a sweet ending. It's a sugar-fueled finale, a fireworks display made of dough almonds and melted gold, figuratively, of course. Because when you're rich in medieval times, you don't just satisfy your sweet tooth. You weaponize it. You roll it out in layers. You coat it in gilded glaze. You parade it down the table like it's the bride at a royal wedding. And sugar is still rare, still expensive, still something that arrives in hard loaves, broken up with hammers shaved into dust by someone who probably resents their job. But your kitchens are stocked. You have sugar enough to pour into puddings, coat candied violets, soak almonds, and craft entire edible gardens. Sometimes dessert starts with marchpane, the almond paste favorite we touched on earlier. But now it's shaped into castles, animals, even your family crest. You don't just serve dessert, you display it. Guests gasp. Courtiers nod. Someone pretends they've never seen a sugar unicorn before. No one eats the first sculpture. That would be rude. But once the second one arrives, identical, equally unnecessary, it's fair game. You've got fruit tarts arranged in swirling spirals, jellied confections glowing like stained glass, honey-soaked fritters fried so crisp they shatter under a spoon. And if it's a feast day, or someone noble is watching, the pastry chef pulls out the big tricks pies that sing, yes, live birds, inside custards, molded into coats of arms, and maybe even fire-breathing sugar dragons, thanks to a pinch of sulfur and a lot of drama. And let's not forget the gingerbread. Not the cozy kind from modern Christmas markets, but thick spiced slabs carved into knights' towers, and exotic animals no one at the table has ever seen but pretends to recognize. It's less a snack, more an art form. Queen Eleanor of Castile is rumored to have enjoyed gingerbread so heavily spiced it required translation by a priest. You might also be offered candied spices, ginger, anise, fennel, seeds all rolled in sugar until they sparkle like tiny gemstones. You nibble on them while sipping spiced wine, letting the flavors linger as a polite buffer between gluttony and guilt. And there's always a final touch: sugar sculptures, dyed pink, blue, and gold shaped into flowers, birds, even saints. Sometimes they're blessed. Sometimes they're cursed, depending on who baked them and how superstitious your guests are. But they always disappear by morning. Want a relatable parallel? Think about the dessert cart at a high-end restaurant. Now multiply it by 10. Add political implications. 3 coats of edible lacquer and the silent judgment of everyone watching. That's your dessert. But all this indulgence isn't just for fun. It's a message. Dessert says, I can afford to waste. In a world where most people don't even finish one course, you end your feast with 8 different types of sugar and a centerpiece that looks like it could grant wishes. You're not just rich, you're sweetly rich. Even your spoons, if we're honest, are different. Silver, gilded, carved with scenes from myth or history, sometimes religious figures, because naturally nothing makes custard taste holier than eating it off St. Peter's engraved head. And here's a little trivia. Treat the word dessert doesn't even exist yet in your time. It comes later from the French desservir, meaning to clear the table. But let's be real. You're not clearing anything. You're just preparing for one last round of indulgence before you slip into the most luxurious food coma ever stitched into a feather-stuffed canopy bed. And if your guests think the night is done, they're wrong. Because nothing washes down sugar better than wine, lots of it. Wine flows through your day like water, mainly because you don't trust water. Not even the spring-fed kind. It might be clear, it might be cold, but let's not pretend anyone in your position is going to risk dysentery just to quench a thirst. That's what wine is for. Red, white, spiced, sweet, sour, mulled, or watered down, it doesn't matter. It's wine, and it's safe. Mostly. You sip it at breakfast, diluted like a polite nod to sobriety. You drink it stronger at lunch with meats and sauces and whatever your steward decided pairs well with wild boar today. And by dinner, you've either worked your way up to the good stuff or can't tell the difference anymore. Either way, your goblet stays full. The wine itself doesn't always come from your region. If you're in England, French wine is the prize. If you're French, you might still prefer Italian. If you're really wealthy, you've got barrels from Crete, Cyprus, or Spain tucked into cellars where the air smells like oak and ambition. Even within your own household, the variety matters. Stronger wines for meat courses, lighter wines for fish, sweet wines for dessert, spiced wines for, well, everything in between. And when we say spiced, we don't mean a pinch of cinnamon and a shrug. No, we mean warmed in a copper cauldron with cloves, nutmeg pepper, sometimes even sugar. The result, a drink that's part potion, part performance. It smells like incense. It tastes like diplomacy. And yes, you drink it, even when it's warm, because in your world, the line between beverage and medicine is extremely blurry. Some nobles even claim their wines aid digestion, soothe the nerves, or keep the bile balanced. That last one is especially important when you've just finished a 10-course meal featuring pastry swans and fish pretending to be birds. Wine makes everything feel intentional. And wine isn't just something you drink, it's something you serve. Lavishly, strategically. You don't just top off cups. You have cupbearers carefully selected for trustworthiness, since poisoning is a hobby among the ambitious. Your guests are watching the wine just as closely as they watch the gossip, waiting to see who gets the best pour, who gets refilled the fastest, and who has to ask twice. It's all part of the choreography. Ever heard of Hippocras? That's your go-to for after dinner. A blend of wine, sugar, and spices strained through a special cloth until it gleams in the cup. You serve it chilled or warm in silver goblets, or crystal if you've got it. while musicians play and someone in the corner dramatically recites Latin poetry no one's really listening to. But everyone claps anyway. And let's not forget mead and ale, though those are more common in northern regions or among lower nobles. You might still indulge in a fine honeyed mead now and then, especially during holidays, or if someone insists on toasting something. But generally, if you're truly rich, it's wine or nothing. Ale is for soldiers, sailors, and anyone who can't afford grape transport. Wine is also your insurance policy. If the food's bad, the wine forgives it. If the conversation drags, the wine smooths it. If your guest starts plotting your downfall in his head, maybe the wine distracts him for an hour. And if it doesn't, well, at least you'll both be too tired to duel by midnight. A modern comparison. Think of it like always having champagne on hand even when you're eating leftovers. Except your leftovers are boar stew and pheasant pie, and your champagne might be hiding notes of pine resin and cinnamon, and you still drink it in long, slow sips, like it might teach you Latin if you concentrate hard enough. So yes, you drink wine all day, because it's safer than water, because it's tastier than broth, and because, let's be honest, you're rich, and it feels good to stain your teeth a little red every time someone tries to impress you with a story you've already heard. But don't get too relaxed, because now comes the part of your day that demands more than good taste. It demands stamina, endurance, and a very patient bladder. Welcome to the medieval noble feast. Feasting for you is not eating. It's theater, ritual, a full-body medieval endurance test, with courses so numerous they blur into each other like a tapestry soaked in gravy. A proper feast doesn't last an hour. It doesn't even last 2. You sit elevated, observed, expected, and the food arrives like a procession. 10 courses. Reasonable. 15 better. 20. Now you're starting to impress. It begins with pomp music, greetings, and that awkward moment where everyone pretends they're not eyeing the roasted centerpiece. A steward announces the first course. Servants, coordinated like dancers, sweep through the hall, balancing trays of meat pie sauces and glazed surprises. The table groans under the weight, but you don't. You straighten your sleeves, nod slightly, and begin. And it's not a buffet. Heaven forbid. You don't serve yourself. That's what attendants are for. One to slice one, to pour one, to watch everyone else do their jobs. Etiquette is a language, and you speak it fluently. Use your fingers for the trencher bread, but never for the roast goose. Always pass to the right. Don't sip before the lord of the manor raises his cup. Don't stab anything unless it's already dead or pretending to be. Between courses, entertainment keeps you from slipping into a coma. A juggler, a poet, a lute player who's clearly trying his best. Sometimes, a trained dog jumps through hoops, or a monkey does card tricks no one understands. You nod politely. The wine helps. Each course builds like an opera. You begin with lighter fare, maybe a soup thickened with almond milk and studded with capons. Then fish, then game meats, then pies bursting with a blend of sweet and savory that would confuse a modern palate. Remember the old trick. If it's too weird to identify, just ask if it's meant to taste like that. It always is. Eventually comes the subtlety, a sculpted showpiece that's more illusion than food. It might be a pastry castle filled with custard soldiers, or a pie that bleeds red wine when cut, or an entire roast boar wearing a fake crown. The point isn't to eat it, it's to admire it, or gossip about it, or pretend not to be unnerved. Some feasts include intermissions. Yes, intermissions a pause, so you can wash your hands with rose water, chat about who got snubbed at last week's banquet, or discreetly burp into a silk napkin. Then you're back in your seat, ready for the next act. At grand events, like coronations or weddings, things get absurd. During the coronation of King Henry VI in 1429, guests were served over 1,000 dishes. Entire oxen roasted birds, refeathered post-cooking eels, braided into edible knots. There were likely more cooks than guests, possibly more animals than people. And yes, nobles showed off by what they served. If your rival lord featured a pastry peacock at his last feast, you go bigger, maybe a sugar swan or a jelly fortress. It's culinary warfare. The only blood spilled is pomegranate syrup. Don't forget the people not eating. Because for every full plate in front of you, there's a row of kitchen staff sweating over fire spit and boiling broth in the back. Scullions turn meat endlessly. Sauciers guard their spice blends like treasure maps. Spit boys, often young boys with singed eyebrows, keep the meat moving so it roasts evenly, and none of them are tasting it. This is for you. The aftermath trenchers soaked with gravy. Bones stacked like architectural experiments. Wine-stained linens. A few nobles nodding off in corners. Someone definitely loosening a belt. But you don't notice any of it. Because just as the final course is cleared and the harpist starts his closing tune, you remember something important. You didn't cook a single bite of this, and yet your appetite runs the show. Down in the bowels of the manor, far from the laughter and clinking goblets, above the real story, unfolds in fire and flour. You don't see it, you don't smell it, but every course you've devoured, every pie you've sliced, every wine you've sipped, has passed through this invisible empire, your kitchen. Not a single room, but a complex. Kitchens plural. Hot kitchens, cold kitchens, pastry rooms, butcher stalls, larders, pantries, cellars, breweries. Some great houses had more rooms for food than rooms for guests, and all of it run like a well-oiled, well-buttered machine. Beneath every roast swan and gilded tart is an army of servants making miracles out of chaos. At the lowest rung, you've got the scullions, the dishwashers, the fire feeders, the water haulers. Covered in soot hair matted with steam, they sleep in corners, wake before the roosters, and go to bed long after your last belch echoes through the hall. They don't dream, they just scrape. Above them, the spit boys, probably around 8 years old if that. Their job, sit beside the fire and turn the roasting meat endlessly. Hours on end. Eyes red, arms sore. One blink too long, and the Lord's dinner burns. That kind of mistake gets remembered. Then come the cooks, sauciers, bakers, game preparers. They are craftsmen and chemists. They know how to preserve a trout for 3 days without a fridge. They know how to disguise leftover rabbit as a new meal. They know how to color an egg yolk with marigold petals and convince your guests it's imported. Some are free men, some are servants, some are women, especially in pastry kitchens. All are essential. None eat first. At the top, the kitchen master or steward. He doesn't touch knives. He touches ledgers. He orders the eel's counts. The saffron threads knows exactly how much beef your household consumes in a week down to the ounce. He answers only to the lord or lady of the house, and maybe not even them. In some castles, the kitchen steward had more power than the chaplain. And let's talk ingredients. Everything is tracked. Wheat is ground in your own mills. Meat is slaughtered in your own yards. Fish arrives, salted dried or slippery from a barrel. Spices are locked away in chests that only one person has the key to. You don't stock food. You curate it. Like art. Like armor. Like legacy. Even the firewood matters. You don't roast a nobleman's venison over green wood or dirty branches. You use seasoned hardwoods, that burn evenly hot and clean. Some estates even had separate woods for roasting versus baking, because in your world, flavor begins at ignition. Did you ever wonder how your meals are still warm when they reach the table after 20 minutes of pageantry and prayer? That's because someone, probably three someones, is standing by with warming trays, thick cloths, and sprinting feet. Timing is everything. A lukewarm roast is a public embarrassment. And in noble society, embarrassment is more dangerous than poison. But these workers, all of them, are invisible to you. You don't thank them. You don't know their names. You might not even realize there are so many. And yet without them, your feast is just fantasy. You'd be chewing cold mutton on stale bread, sipping water from a dirty well, wondering what happened to your peacock surprise. Here's a real-world comparison. Imagine a Michelin-starred restaurant where every course is plated by candlelight, carried up 4 flights of stairs, and timed to coincide with a lute solo. Now, add in live birds, royal expectations, and the very real threat of being fired for using the wrong mustard. That's your kitchen. Even monarchs had their food empires. The English royal household kept entire departments like the ewery water and vessels, the spicery spices, and the scalding house for cleaning game and poultry. Some noble kitchens employed over 100 people, not soldiers, not servants, just cooks, just for you. So no, you didn't lift a finger, but your hunger moves armies. Your appetite sets dozens of wheels turning. Your next meal is already in motion, because by the time you wipe your fingers and lean back in your chair, the cooks are already awake again, preparing the future. And tomorrow, you'll rise to the scent of fresh white bread, just as you always do. So now, you know being rich in medieval times wasn't just about gold or titles. It was about bread, soft as clouds, meats dressed like royalty wine that flowed like rivers, and desserts too beautiful to eat. Every bite you took was someone else's hard labor, someone else's masterpiece. And as you sink deeper into your pillow, maybe you can still hear the distant clatter of feasting halls, the soft hiss of spiced wine warming over fire, the rustle of servants slipping through corridors in the dark. Let it all fade now. You've dined like a noble, imagined centuries of flavor and seen behind the velvet curtain. Close your eyes. Tomorrow, the kitchen wakes again, but for now, you rest. Sleep well, traveler.
What we are about to do will define our legacy. Are you ready for the consequences?
I am. Our people depend on us.
With this handshake, the treaty is sealed between our houses. May the alliance prosper. We offer this tribute to the eternal flame.
we proceed with this, there is no turning back.
We both knew this day would come eventually.